Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. This week, we're talking about what it takes to run a profitable local news website. The last decade hasn't been kind to local news. While the entire news industry has experienced hardship, local newspapers have been hit particularly hard. A recent article in the American Prospect detailed how newspaper chains have been bought up by private equity firms and then were systematically cut to the bone, the private equity firms wringing out every last cent of profit before closing the newspapers for good. Even tech companies have struggled to make local news profitable. AOL famously launched Patch, a network of hundreds of hyperlocal news sites, only to sell it off a few years later. That's what makes Mike Shapiro's success so interesting. Shapiro was working as a lawyer when, in a bid to spend more time with his kids, he launched a news site for his New Jersey town. That site soon spawned two news sites and then blossomed from there. The TAPInto network now boasts dozens of sites all across New Jersey. I recently interviewed Shapiro about how he has managed to find success in local news where so many others have failed. Let's jump right into it. Hey, Mike, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Simon.
So the reason I'm having you on, obviously, is to talk about this, amazingly successful local news network that you've created. But you don't actually come from journalism, right?
Correct. I was an attorney before I started TAPInto.
Uh-huh. And so what kind of triggered the switch into journalism? Like, was it something you were always fascinated with, or?
Yeah, well, there was a number of different triggers. The most important being is that when my son was one, we found out that he needed open heart surgery. He's now 11 and he's on travel soccer and he's fine. But it kind of made me rethink what I was doing with my life, because at the time I was an attorney commuting back and forth to New York City. And between the work plus the commuting, I barely saw him. So when I started TAPInto, I was looking to do something where I could actually see my wife and son. I could do something that I'd really like to do, and I could make a difference in the community at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So and what was kind of what community you're talking about, first of all?
Sure. Well, I started it in New Providence, New Jersey, where I lived at the time, and what also kind of had spurred me to do this was, at the time we basically just had a weekly hard copy newspaper in our town, and so you'd have to wait a week or two to find out whether the high school football team won a big game, or whether there was a rash of burglaries in town. You'd have to wait a week, and sometimes you'd have to wait almost 2 weeks to find out that had happened in the town. And so I felt, there has to be a better way. And then in addition to that, in terms of that particular newspaper, it had a decided editorial bent to it. And so when I started TAPInto, we wanted to create an all online, objective, local daily newspaper so people could get their news 24/7. And while readers can write letters to the editor and express their opinion, we do not tell people how to vote or what to think. Our philosophy is, if you give people objective, nonpartisan news and information, they can make up their own minds. They don't need us telling them how to vote and what to think.
So but you launched this site. It's not called TAPInto back then, wasn't it? Called something else, like
Right.
Press
Originally, it was called thealternativepress.com, and we named it that because we were the alternative to that hard copy weekly newspaper in our town. And then we started to expand to neighboring towns because
well, before we get into that, so is it just you that's running the site? Like, you're having to learn how to do journalism, like, on the fly, basically?
At that time, well, yeah, I did most of the journalism. I did some of the sales. We had some commissioned salespeople doing some of the sales. And then as we started to get some revenue, I would bring on freelance reporters who would cover stories as well. And that started to increase our news coverage.
And it was like a steep learning curve, I'm guessing. Like, were you like attending like local city or town council, board of supervisors, school board meetings, and learning how to like report on those kinds of things?
Yeah, I was attending the council meetings and the board of ed meetings, and really learning as I went. Thankfully, because most attorneys can write well, but most attorneys are not journalists. So I had to learn how to write like a journalist. But it was a very steep learning curve, and I had to also learn things like about technology, because I didn't know what it took to run a website or anything like that. I was learning a lot of things all at one time.
And how long? Well, when did it launch? What year?
Yeah, it launched October of 2008.
And how long did it take before the community really started noticing and you started seeing like an actual steady return visitors?
Well, it was funny because I remember back then we were about 6 months into it, and I was all excited because we were getting we were getting a couple of hundred page views a day, and now of course I would laugh at that, but at that time I was very excited about that, and
Yeah.
what started to happen was people in neighboring towns reached out to us and said, hey, can you expand to our town? So we started to launch sites in neighboring towns. Basically right after we launched New Providence, we launched Berkeley Heights and Summit almost immediately, and
Uh
then
huh.
people
So
started.
you were running three sites almost immediately after you launched.
Correct, and then we started to get more requests. So folks in Chatham and in Millburn reached out to me and said, hey, can you come to our town? So we launched in Chatham and Millburn. It was around January of 2009, and
And what
then.
was what was happening on the business side? Like how long did it take before after you launched after advertisers started knocking on your door?
It was about, I would say, about 2 to 3 months before we had our first advertisers, and in the beginning we didn't have very many, but as word spread about the site we started to get more and more advertisers, which was great. And I saw enough potential with it that in the beginning of February of 2009 I left my job in the city to do it full time, and then
Hmm.
about 2 weeks later is when uh, AOL launched Patch. And one of the first towns in the country they came to was Millburn, New Jersey, where we had a site. And when they first came, we didn't know they were owned by AOL. And
Uh-huh.
so they
And for,
launched.
for those who don't know, Patch was a basically a huge network of local what they called hyper local news sites that it launched, where it was covering townships or even in sometimes some cases like neighborhoods and like cities or something like that. And this was going to be what was the guy who runs Patch and now Oath or AOL now Tim Armstrong. He this was going to be his grand vision, and through this like accumulation of over 1,000 local news sites, he was going to make a high profit margin on each one, and it would transfer to high profits for AOL. So a competing Patch launches in one of the townships that you're covering.
Correct. And when we didn't know that they were owned by AOL, and so they launched sites in Livingston and Westfield. Which Livingston, I was born and raised in Livingston, and Westfield was very close to the other towns that we had. So we launched a site in Livingston, and we launched one in Westfield, and then it became public that that Patch was owned by AOL, and they were going to go all over the country and spend hundreds of millions of dollars. And so at that point, we stopped expanding and just tried to survive. And we did that by trying to put out the highest quality original local news that we could and continue to develop relationships with the local businesses in town. But when people reached out to us and said, hey, can you come to our town? We started to say no because we couldn't do any more sites ourselves.
Yeah. So at this point, the network is covers several towns, but you're still kind of the editor in chief slash publisher, having to kind of micromanage most of the sites.
Correct. And so as revenue started to increase, we were able to bring on a first part-time, then full-time editor, and their job basically was to coordinate the freelancers. They would do some original content themselves, and they would edit the content, which freed me up to run the business and do more on the sales side.
hmm The sales side being like advertising.
Correct. And so basically that was kind of the framework for a period of about 4 years. And during that 4 year period, we were also able to bring on more freelance reporters as our revenue increased. But we kept getting requests from people to expand to their town, and we kept having to say no. And so it got me thinking, well, how do we expand yet keep it really local? And the first iteration of that was I came up with this idea of licensing. So we started to license alternative press sites to people that wanted to start it in their own town. But
hmm
we quickly found that there were some problems with the licensing model. One problem was that we were very limited in the amount of support we could provide to the licensees. And second was that, under a license, it's really questionable whether they own the business or they're just kind of renting it.
Yeah.
And so, we licensed for a period of about 6 months. And during that 6 month period, we began working on the idea of becoming a franchisor. And once we were able to do that and we had all the paperwork done, we offered all the licensees the opportunity to convert their license to a franchise, and then anybody new would be a franchisee. The key difference under the franchise model is, one, we could provide unlimited support to them, and second, they truly owned their business, and which enabled them to build equity in their business and gave them the right to, if they wanted to, eventually sell their business.
Mm-hmm. So you're kind of moving from like township to township within New Jersey mostly, right? You've also done a few in like New York and
Yeah, New
Pennsylvania,
York.
maybe
Yeah,
just New York.
New York. Yeah, and
And what was your kind of way of evaluating whether another township could support a new TAPInto? Well, eventually became TAPInto, right? And so, what was your way of evaluating whether a township could take on a new TAPInto site? Was it just based on level of interest from whoever wanted to buy the franchise? What was kind of going into that calculus?
Yeah. So we started franchising December 2013, and that was around the time we did the name change to TAPInto. And in terms of our first franchisees, we really didn't have. I look back now, and it's kind of funny, but we didn't have any screening procedures at the time. So if people said to me, "Hey, Mike, I want to do this in my town," I was like, "Okay, great. Here's the paperwork." They would wait the requisite number of days. They would sign the paperwork. We would start training, and then they'd be up and running. Today we have a far more sophisticated way of screening potential franchisees, but we've learned a lot through that.
And what was and so now what is your screening process? Not for we'll talk about the franchisees in a second, but what's your way of evaluating whether a specific locality is a good target for your business?
Today, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, today, well, one, we look at population. We really like to see that there's, whether it's one town or the franchisees combining multiple towns into one site, that there be at least 10,000 population, ideally at least 20,000 population, and that there be at least 250 businesses. Ideally more than that, but at least 250 businesses. So in terms of, and people say to me, "Oh, well, what if there's already another publication in the town or something like that?" And really, I don't really look at that because we so differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. And in my view, there's more than enough room for at least two publications in a given town.
And that's funny because like in some cities now, a lot of them are one newspaper cities, and whereas like 50 years ago they would have like 3 or 4 newspapers. There's very few multi newspaper cities, and there's this argument that even in cities you can't support more than one newspaper, but you're showing in like townships that only have 10 to 20,000 people can support multiple publications.
Oh, right. And we do have sites now that cover towns. Our largest one right now is Newark, New Jersey, which is 500,000 people. So yeah, I mean the model can work at really any population levels from around 10,000 population, and we know at least through 500,000 people. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that our model is so unique, and also our cost structure is so low. The franchisees' cost structure is so low that they don't need 1,000 advertisers on their site to make a nice profit.
Yeah, and so we talked about how you evaluate the localities. How do you evaluate / recruit the franchisees?
Yeah, in terms of the franchisees, one is we really look for people that are connected in their town, and second is that at least one person involved in the franchise needs to either be a journalist or a writer, and they need to have somebody involved in the business who has sales skills, ideally, advertising sales skills. So that's one kind of measure. The other thing in terms of screening is that they now go through an application process. We do background screening. Then they meet with we have a prospective franchisee committee composed of franchisees. They're the ones that recommend whether a prospective franchisee should be approved or should be refused the opportunity to franchise. And last year, 2017, the committee rejected more people than it approved.
Mm-hmm. And let's say someone does get approved. What's the structure of the franchise look like?
Sure. So we have a number of different models. Our original model, and now we have a lot of new models, but our original model was where it was one person and they would do both the content and the ad sales, and they would be the franchisee. Today, that accounts for less than 10% of our franchisees. The most common model is where it's two people who do it together part-time. One does the content, one does the ad sales, and usually one or both are the actual franchisee. Our third model is what I call an investor model, where people buy the franchise and they bring on someone to do the content and someone to do the ad sales. That's actually our fastest growing segment of our models. We have 5 hard copy newspapers that have franchised from us to be their online site. We also have a nonprofit model. For example, the Plainfield YMCA franchised the Plainfield site from us. They own the franchise and they do the sales side, and they partnered with a local journalist who does the content side. And we also have a university model where St. Bonaventure University franchised as a journalism practicum for their students. And now they're in the process of getting the business school students involved on the sales side. So we have a number of different models, operational and successful at this point. And I think that's really important because there's no one size fits all for a given community. And it may take, for example, a nonprofit or a university to do it in a given community. In another community, it might involve 2 people doing it together part-time. And yet in other communities, it might be where there's a hard copy newspaper and they're struggling online. And so they can franchise from us and become, and we can provide the technology and the platform at a fraction of what it would cost that hard copy newspaper to do it on their own.
And so the corporate mothership that you run, it makes money through selling the franchises. And what else? Do you get a percentage of ad sales?
Yeah, so there's a franchise fee, and then there's a 90-10 split on ad sales. They keep 90%, we get 10%, up to the point where they hit 100,000 in revenue, and then our percentage drops to 5%. We actually take a loss on every franchise we sell. Where we break even and eventually make a profit is on the 10% revenue share because of our cost structures here at corporate. Because we provide a lot to the franchisees. We provide the site, hosting, email accounts. We handle all their tech support. We have basically, full-time developers who are constantly making improvements to the site, fixing bugs, things like that. We do all their billing, all their credit card processing of their advertisers. We provide them with everything from an editable media kit to contracts and everything in between. We train them on the editorial side, the sales side, how to use the site. We set up their Facebook and Twitter and train them in social media. And then we have 3 full-time and 4 part-time employees who service the franchisees once they launch, providing them with customer service, helpful hints. We also, we have, out of those employees, we have 2 full-time, 2 part-time editors who read their news stories every day and provide feedback to them post-publication about how they can learn and grow as a writer. So we really provide a plethora of support and training and advice to our franchisees that is really uncommon. Particularly for a franchise that charges so little for a franchise fee.
Mm-hmm. So like one of your editors at the corporate headquarters will reach out to one of the TAPInto sites who wrote about like maybe the city or the town council meeting the night before and say, hey, this really could have been split up into 3 stories and you could have covered this with this angle, like give them helpful hints of what they've seen work in terms of other networks and stuff like that. Because some of the people at least, I mean, it sounds like now you're requiring at least one of them be a journalist, but it wasn't always that way. Sometimes they were like you, they had to learn journalism on the fly. So they needed that kind of guidance on, because I remember I started out in local newspapers and I was horrible when I started. I remember my first school board meeting I went and wrote an article basically just summarizing the entire school board meeting bit by bit. And then I went and turned it into my editor, and my editor was like, no, like there were 5 different stories here. Like these are just starting points of 5 different stories you should be pursuing instead of just writing one summary of the entire meeting. Like lots of tips like that isn't evidence to an unexperienced reporter, right?
Correct. And so they're doing things like that. They're suggesting better ways for the franchisee to write their leads. They're giving them feedback about attribution and headline writing and things like that. And we also provide continuing education to all of our franchisees. So one every 2 weeks we have an online training that's also recorded. So that way, if they are not able to be on the training, they can watch it later. We have an intranet. Which we call it TAPInto University, which provides just an amazing amount of training materials, all the previous training sessions, everything that they kind of need to own and operate their business is there. And then we also have a biweekly franchisee call, which is recorded. So if they miss the call, they can listen to it later, where we give company updates, and we also provide general tips that are for everybody. We have a private Facebook group for all the franchisees where the franchisees can interact with each other, and also where we provide them with updates there as well. And then we have an in-person franchisee meeting, which is also videotaped. So if they can't make it, they can watch the video later. And we have that meeting quarterly where we provide continuing education. Oftentimes we'll bring in outside speakers. So for example, for our April meeting coming up, we have an outside speaker coming in speaking about networking and how to take a lead that you meet at a networking event and convert it into a sale.
So tell me about a franchise that you're really proud of. Like it was one that just came in and just really just blew away the competition. Maybe got like some local public official fired because of their investigative reporting. Like tell me about something where you're like, wow, this is more than just reissuing press releases and stuff, where it did like a service to the community.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think, like, for example, Curtis Leeds, who runs and owns our Flemington Raritan. TAPInto Flemington Raritan. He's done some amazing things, including actually even to the point of he hired an attorney to prosecute an Oprah violation, and he won. He has gotten documents released that were not the government was refusing to release. He's done all kinds of things like that, and his site is excellent. Jackie Lieberman in Westfield. She has at this point the most successful of all of the TAPInto sites. And she's done things like report on Board of Health meetings that nobody covers. And thanks to her reporting, a number of restaurants were fined, and several actually went out of business because they were violating all kinds of health codes that none of the public knew about. And we had Jenny Derricks up in Sparta, where she was able to get a dash cam camera released regarding an officer involved shooting that they refused to release. And I could go on, but those are the 3 that just pop out in my head based on the question you just asked.
And a lot of the people work, or at least a few that I've spoken to when I did an article about your network, they're like former newspaper journalists who like worked locally, but their newspapers shut down or like severely retracted and they got laid off, right?
Yeah, a number of them have been in that situation. Some have retired from journalism, and this gives them an opportunity to get back involved. And then we do have a number of sites where the person who's doing the content isn't a journalist, but they can write well, and we train them from soup to nuts so that they can really do good journalism. Obviously, as your experience when you were first starting out attest to, it takes time, but with good training and feedback, you can become a good journalist, even if you haven't gone to school for journalism. I always say to people that should not be a barrier, because look what I was able to achieve, and I didn't go to journalism school, so we never hold that against somebody.
And so why is your network succeeding while like all these local newspapers are retreating?
Well, I think the overall answer is, we're filling the void being created by local and regional newspapers either going out of business or slashing their newsrooms. And I think when it comes down to it, it's our model that's successful. It's locally owned and operated sites that can still take advantage of the content network that we've created and the advertising network. So our
Uh-huh.
sites, for example, can share content with each other with a click of a button. What that means is, for example, on a Friday night, one of our sites in Union County, say Berkeley Heights is playing Westfield. Only one of the sites needs to cover that story. Both of the sites can use it. On a typical Friday night, where we have, now we have 15 sites in Union County. We have more sports coverage than not only any local paper, not only any regional paper, but even the state newspaper. Um,
Uh-huh.
because we've been able to create this content network. Similarly, for example, if the Essex County Executive opens a new park in Montclair, Montclair will cover that story, but any of our Essex County sites can use that story on their site because their readers want to know that there's a new park in Montclair that they can take their kids to. Similarly, on the advertising side, when the Millburn franchisee goes into a Millburn business, that Millburn business wants to reach the residents of Millburn, but they also want to reach neighboring towns. And there's no other publication that can do that for them except for us. So that Millburn franchisee can sell them into their Millburn site and help them market there in Millburn, but they can also sell them into our Livingston site and our South Orange Maplewood site and any of the other sites in that area. So the franchisee benefits, obviously, by increased revenue. The business benefits by being able to market in those towns. And the community benefits because now that business is not only able to stay in business, but is able to thrive and stay local. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Uh-huh. And so Facebook and Google, like they're getting a lot of blame for newspapers' pains, and they've especially been moving in at the local level where you can obviously target by the zip code and stuff like that. What are your advertising offerings that make it more attractive than Facebook and Google?
Well, one, when a business advertises on TAPInto, it comes with content marketing, so which is really one of the most valuable things in terms of online marketing these days. And it's something that truthfully Facebook and Google really don't offer. So when a business advertises, that enables them to submit things like press releases, including whether it's a sale that they're having or whether there's a new employee in their office or whether they're expanding their territory or anything like that. That content can be published. They can put sales on the calendar if they're a realtor. They can put up open houses on the calendar. Realtors can also put up real estate listings. Restaurants can put up classifieds. I'm just giving you examples, but and they can include link backs to their website. So not only are our readers being able to see that content, but it also helps with search engine optimization. How high these businesses' websites rank on search engines like Google and Bing, and again, Facebook and Google really don't offer this kind of thing. A second thing that businesses can do is sponsor. So they can sponsor any section on any site, and that sponsorship includes their logo, clicking through to their website, not just on the section, but all the articles in the section. And it also comes with a featured branded column that business can write as often as they want about whatever they want to write about. So again, it's content marketing, branding, identifying themselves in the community, showing the residents that they're part of the community. Third, we can do, we have e-news that people can sign up for free. It comes out every day. And in that e-news, there are 3 exclusive ad spots that can be sold weekly. So that's a really great opportunity for a business to get their actual advertisement in front of eyeballs every day for 7 straight days. And we've had everyone from restaurants to the current governor of New Jersey do ads in the e-news with us. And
And
fourth is
and your franchisees, they're incentivized, right, to sell. Like they get money, they get the most money from selling on their own TAPInto site, but they're also incentivized. Like, let's say there's like a chain of restaurants that span over several different townships that have TAPInto sites. They get a cut if they can sell on other people's TAPInto sites as well. So that incentivizes them to not just sell within their own TAPInto site, but if it's like a state or national business, to get them to advertise across a bunch, right? So you get like network effects, basically.
Correct. The current percentage for that is the selling franchisee gets 45%, the receiving franchisee gets 45%. We get the same 10%. So basically, all of the sites are now motivated to sell into each other, and we changed that percentage about a month and a half ago now. It used to be less for the seller, but since we've changed it to 45-45, there's been the most cross sales that we've ever seen in the last month and a half.
Hmm.
So which is really exciting. And the same thing works with regional accounts. So say one of the franchisees has a relationship with a regional business. Doesn't matter where it's located. They can come to me and say, "Hey, Mike, I know the CEO of United Airlines. Can I take on that account and try to sell them into as many sites as possible?" And as long as another site's not working on that account, the answer is yeah, go for it. So it also opens up these regional sales opportunities and state sales opportunities. Eventually, when we have enough sites across the country, national advertising opportunities that way.
Well, I want to talk about that in a second, but so tell me some traffic numbers. How like influential and big is the TAPInto network in terms of like how many people are reading it on a monthly basis?
Sure. Well, in January, we had over 2.3 million page views, and we had over 900,000 absolute unique users that came to the site in January. And
Which is a lot when you consider like what percentage of that is of the like New Jersey population, because these are just mainly New Jersey sites. So 900,000 might not seem like a lot for a national news site, but for a state base that isn't even in every single county, that doesn't cover every single township, that's a lot, right?
well, yeah, I mean, we at this point we only have less than 15% of New Jersey's municipalities have a Tap Into site, but those traffic numbers represent about almost 25% of the state.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So you mentioned national. So what are your ambitions? Like, I think when I last talked to you like 6 months ago, you were talking about wanting to expand maybe into Florida. Like, what movements have you made in terms of expanding beyond New Jersey?
Sure. Well, we have the five sites in New York, and there's some movement there. I would expect that we're going to have our next franchisee in New York by April. And then we've started to work on Florida, and I would be very surprised if we didn't have our first franchisee in Florida in the next 2 to 3 months. And then I'm going to work on developing Florida and New York more, but also continue to work on New Jersey. At this point, our kind of the number of people reaching out to us about franchising has increased dramatically, which is great. It used to be back 2 years ago, maybe we would get one person a month reaching out to us about franchising, and now we're typically getting 3 to 5 people a week reaching out to us. So that's a really good sign, and that's in addition to my reach outs to people, because I spend quite a bit of my time reaching out to what I call connected people, and talking with them about TAPInto, because connected people usually know people who might want to do this in their town, or they know people who might want to do this in their town. So it's kind of like peeling an onion to find the right people to do this in a given town.
And is the goal to be in all 50 states eventually?
Yeah, eventually I'd love to go national, but I also know what my limitations are. I think in order to do that, we really need to have a partner who can partner with us to help take us all over the country. I'm kind of limited in what I can do. But I think if we could find a strategic partner, which we've already started to get some interest of possible partners reaching out to us, but it's a matter of finding that right fit that kind of sees our vision and also wants to be a partner in that vision with us.
Do you think there's a risk of expanding too quickly, like basically going wrong where where Patch just tried to plop down in 800 communities all at once, whereas like the reason, I think, if correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the reason you've been successful is you've grown organically. You've waited until there was demand in each new or township that you moved into. Whereas if like tomorrow you got $100 million in VC money and just tried to open a bunch in 100 different or 1,000 different townships at once, it probably wouldn't be as successful because it didn't have that organic growth.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think one of the I think the main reason that Patch hasn't been as successful is that um, not only did they expand really quickly, but they expanded before they had worked out the model and worked out the kinks in the model. At this point with us, we the model is solid, which is good. So that enables us to scale more quickly and without the negative consequences that Patch suffered. At the same time, I wouldn't be looking to open 1,000 sites all over the country in the next month. It needs to be measured growth, and it needs to be done the right way. It's not a matter of putting up flags in as many towns as possible. It's doing it the right way. And so in terms of that strategic partner, that's an important part of it. I don't want $100 million that we can then kind of just explode with 20,000 sites all over the country in a month. That's not what I'm looking to do. I'm looking for a partner that sees that vision of, no, you know what, let's try to go into these couple of states. Let's try to find franchisees in these 10 to 25 locations in a given state. Let's grow that. Once that's successful, let's expand from there. That's what I'm kind of looking for.
Okay. Well, we're out of time, but thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. Where can people find you?
Well, they can find us at TAPInto.net. And if they want to find information about franchising, they can go to www.starttap.net. And of course, they can also contact me anytime at mshapiro at tapinto.net as well.
Great. Well, thanks again. And this was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for having me, Simon.
Okay. That's all I have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.